Pal? Let's talk about what's really happening over here. Let's take a look at a couple of things. I'm just going to start the live stream on the tube use too, and make sure November 13th. And in the last, no, not 24 hours, it's Monday. So we're going to do the whole weekend wrap up. This is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday hardware losses for the Russians. 37 tanks, 62 armored personnel vehicles, and a whopping 80 artillery pieces. Now, a lot of that, of course, is from Avdiivka, where the third wave has begun. And we'll talk about some of the details around Avdiivka in just a moment. Some of you may have seen today, one of the videos I put out was based on maps that had been shared by a guy named Roman Shermeta, who I don't know his work, but I loved his maps, boy. It was a map of the enemies of Russia. When you care about everybody having the basic necessities of life, that's where civilization begins. It doesn't begin with nuclear weapons. It doesn't begin with nuclear power plants and freaking pipelines and automobile manufacturing. It doesn't begin with armies and with marching and guns. That's not where civilization begins. Civilization begins when we care enough that the old woman down the street gets clean drinking water. That's where it begins. And Russia doesn't have it, which is why 30 years into the post-Soviet regime, 20% of Russians are still without indoor toilets because the people at the top see the people of Russia as nothing but a commodity, a disposable commodity, no less, that can be used to consolidate their own power. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's why we here in Ukraine have been warned by President Zelensky to brace ourselves for the onslaught of winter. Not simply that it's going to get cold here, as it does each and every year, but rather that the Russians will take advantage of the winter to strike energy infrastructure here in Ukraine and attempt to freeze us in our beds. We know that Russia is stockpiling missiles for this. We know that Russia has already made 61 strikes against Ukrainian energy infrastructure this year alone. We know that the first missile and drone attack against Kyiv came this past weekend. It woke me out of bed at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. There's a video about it, of course. It was the first strike against Kyiv in 52 days, and there are more to come. But mind you, at the civilian energy infrastructure, now I don't know, and I've been trying to figure out what that retribution might be. Because the Ukrainians are not about to start committing war, not about to start committing war crimes just because the Russians do it. I'm convinced that you're not going to see Belgorod plunged into darkness because Kyiv is plunged into darkness. So what could the Ukrainians possibly go after that would be meaningful to Putin, that would scare him maybe enough to not do what he's threatening to do? Thank you, F and Hell, for the tiny dinies and everything else. And for the hearts to hands and cones and everything. Thank you. You guys are the best. And thanks for liking the live and sharing the live, guys. Now, I've been thinking about this and trying to figure it out. The Black Sea Fleet's already in hiding. They're doing everything they can to decapitate the troops in the rear and to disable logistics. What else could the Ukrainians possibly go after this winter to try to strong arm Putin into not hitting the energy infrastructure of this nation? What makes up 60% of the Russian economy. Oil and gas, baby. You got gas pipelines, you got oil pipelines, you got refining facilities, you got lines, pipelines to military industrial complexes. Could it be that targeted strikes against Russia's energy infrastructure, the engine of its economy, is what Zelensky has in mind? I don't know. I don't know, but maybe. Stevie Decal seems to agree. And FNL is sending confetti. So maybe we're onto something there, folks. It could be. We don't, I don't, I'm not saying for sure. I certainly don't know. But thinking about it, I'm thinking that might be. Look at, you got pipelines that stretch for thousands and thousands of kilometers, unguarded. And now they've got a drone fleet and are mass producing drones with 1,000-kilometer range. That puts much of the energy infrastructure into range. At least 5 refineries that I'm aware of. At least 5. So we'll see what happens there. Chechnya, Kadyrov is talking about succession. He does not look good. The Russians are worried about a destabilized Chechnya. The Chechen wars are not that long ago. They were bad for Russia. They were terrible for Chechnya, of course. And of course, the Russians couldn't have won them if it weren't for the traitor Kadyrov. He's the one that handed them the keys to the country and set himself up as viceroy, for all intents and purposes, over the vassal state. So now he's talking about succession because he doesn't look good. He does not look good at all. The problem is his kids are all still kids. Guess who's next in line for the throne? A 15-year-old boy, Adam Kadyrov, who's already received every medal and honorarium that you can, who, as part of the TikTok brigade, was sent to Ukraine mostly to shoot TikToks and have his picture taken at the front line. And he is best known for having beaten a restrained man who was in custody and who was unarmed and unable to fight back. That's what he is most known for. And so the Russians are worried about stability. Kadyrov, in his drug-induced miasma, is talking about appointing his 15-year-old son as his successor. And nothing says political stability like a 15-year-old sociopath on the throne. Is it, my friends? I mean, that really just screams stability. This is where we're at. According to UK and American military intelligence and confirmed by the Ukrainian MOD, they believe that all 1 million of the North Korean shells have been moved to the front line. Now, it is possible that some of them were hit and cooked off in 2 hits last week, but we don't know for sure that that's what was hit. They were clearly ammo dumps that went up, but what was in them is unknown. At least 1 million North Korean shells are now said to be inside of Ukraine. As we approach the winter campaign against Kyiv and the country, air defense is on everybody's mind. Today, we got notification that the U.S. government has purchased from the country of Jordan 60 Gepards for Ukraine. Gepards are these light, I think it's a 102 millimeter shell that they fire, if I'm not mistaken. And they're a light gun for air defense, for drones, great for drones, great for low-flying, any low-flying target. Not what you want for hypersonic missiles, but great for drones. And 60 of them are on their way. Now, it's unlikely that all 60 are in functioning shape, but let's say half of them work right out of the box. That's 30 Gepards. That's 10 times as many as Germany is sending to protect Odessa right now. And then you got another 30 for spare parts or for repair. So my guess is that let's be conservative and say that only half of them are working. That's still 30 working Gepards and then lots of spare parts. It's a big deal as we stare down the barrel of winter that's coming. Germany has stepped up in spades, doubling military aid for 2024 from 4 billion to 8 billion euros. Now, this measure has yet to be approved by the parliament in Germany, but the measure is said to have large scale support and expected to pass through. I forget. I don't want to say the wrong name of the German parliament right now, because if I do, and the if I get it wrong, it's going to be bad. So let's just say the German parliament. Further, the Germans are ponying up two more Iris anti-aircraft or air defense systems. And these things are supposed to be great. They got a bunch of them in from the Germans already. And of course, we know the Germans have pledged a Patriot system. So the world is aware of the challenge that Ukraine is facing as we move into the winter. Yeah, PH, I didn't want to say it because if I'm wrong, it harkens back to another age. But I think that's it. I do think that's it. Hey, Mike, how you doing? Anyway, sorry. I'll look that up after we're done. Okay, couple of frontline updates. In the Avdiivka direction, I guess it's a nightmare, is what it is. It's an absolute nightmare. The northern attack, right? Because in Avdiivka, what they're trying to do is a two-pronged attack, a pincer move, to isolate and encircle Avdiivka. And the Russians have moved two brigades up near Novosibirsk in the north, and they're funneling the men along a known route to the front line to attack the town of Stepove. That last 500 meters from the forest line to the town is open field. It's open field. And it's all within range of the Ukrainian ATGMs, as well as the artillery loaded with cluster munitions. So you have all this enemy out in the field, and they're sitting ducks. They're sitting ducks. It appears that over the weekend, the Ukrainians eliminated from the battlefield over 1,000 men, either KIA or WIA. 1,000 men in one weekend, as the Russians just send meat wave after meat wave after meat wave. Now, when you're sending that many men, even if 20% of them get through, it's a danger to you. And so for a short time, some of the Russians had managed to take up a toehold on the west side of the railroad tracks and get into the town of Stepove. They were quickly eliminated, however, and the Russians were all forced back, having made about 100 meters of ground up in the north. In the south, all attacks are said to have been repelled by the Ukrainian armed forces. And in fact, the Ukrainians took a little ground in the southern Avdiivka flank this weekend. There are all kinds of wild claims from the Russians about they've taken Stepove. There's ample evidence they have not. They're fighting in Avdiivka. That might be the case. Some of Avdiivka might be in the gray zone now. But they certainly don't have any strongholds or entrenched positions. And in fact, they have mostly leveled everything that they can. The artillery has been systematically leveling the town of Avdiivka for the last month now. With this weekend's losses, according to Zaluzhny, So far, the offensive in Avdiivka has cost the Russians 10,000, I'm sorry, 11,000 men, over 100 tanks, 200 personnel, armored personnel vehicles, 55 artillery pieces, and 7 Su-25 fighter jets at $35 million apiece, by the way. So there's that. In the Volodar direction, the Russians have made the same mistake again. It's the same situation as last time in Volodar. Thanks for the roses, truthful. It's the same situation in Volodar as it was, 6 months ago? And the Russians are suffering heavy losses there as well, making no progress. In Krinky, we had a PR fiasco today. This is amazing to me. The Russian Ministry of Defense released a press release saying that in the south, on the Kherson southern axis, troops are being repositioned to more advantageous locations east of the Dnipro River, which is another way of saying we're retreating. We're getting the fuck out of here. That's what it seems to have said. The post was, or the press release was posted to TASS, to RBC, to RIA. Hey, Sparkly 15. Thanks, man. To TASS, to RIA, to RBC. All Russian state media outlets carried this message. Now, they also took it down immediately. It was up for maybe 10 minutes before it got taken down. Now, dig it. RBC, alone among them, replaced it with sending of a false report is provocation. Now, that's not clear what that means. Who sent a false report? Who's being provoked? We don't know. It is possible that the Russian Ministry of Defense propaganda machine is in so much trouble and in such disarray that a report from last year, because remember, the fall of Kherson City, or the liberation of Kherson City, happened last year on 11/11. And we're just 2 days out from that. Is it possible that somebody recycled a press release from the retreat a year ago? Or is it just a marvelous dichotomy of karma that the Russians are in retreat again? This time, not from the right bank to the left bank, but from the left bank, hopefully, to Crimea. And we'll see that land bridge to Crimea finally cut. That's our greatest hope. Russia on fire this weekend. We saw that 19 rail cars had been hit. Now, at the time that I reported it in the video, I didn't have the information I'm about to give you now. 2 IEDs were found on the rail tracks, according to Russian state media. That's a big deal, because this rail track was only 150 kilometers from Moscow. If this is true, and being admitted to by the Russians, that partisan activity inside of Russia, so close to Moscow, derailed a train. And remember, it's trains that got those million North Korean shells to the front line. In Russia, everything runs by train. That's a big deal, boy. That's a big deal. Kudos to the Ukrainian partisans that pulled that off. Now, we still don't have any word whether the gunpowder factory that went up was sabotage or an accident. Certainly, that's an industry that is prone to fires. I forgot to mention, on the train line, There is a report that there was video equipment tied to a tree with a remote uh, transmitter attached to it. Somebody watched, waited, then detonated those IEDs, is what it looks like. That's what it appears to have happened with the train derailment. On the subject of partisan activity in Melitopol, partisans blew up the headquarters of the Russian Defense Forces during a meeting between the FSB and Rosguardia, the National Guard of Russia, taking out a number of senior officers. So the partisans are active. On the other side of the coin, it appears that Pavel Prigozhin, the 25-year-old son of Yevgeny Prigozhin, has taken command of what's left of Wagner, and it has been incorporated into the National Guard. Thanks, Bob. Hey, Bob West, long time no see, pal. Good to see you. And it's been integrated into the National Guard. On the subject of traditional Russian allies moving away from Russia, it is worth mentioning that since 1992, the Armenians have had an embassy in Britain. It is in London. It's a flat. It's a two-room flat in London is what it is. Since 1992, they've maintained this two-room flat in London. The Armenians have just moved from a two-room flat to a 17 million pound mansion that they are in the process of renovating for the new embassy, for the new official Armenian embassy. It seems as though the Armenians want to get close with London. Having seen the support that London provides to Ukraine against Russia, is it any wonder? And so that's a real sea change in relationship between Armenia and the West. So keep your fingers crossed that that relationship continues to develop. Now, there have been, in the last 2 weeks, at least 7 occasions where Russian commercial airliners have had to make forced or unscheduled landings. It happened today with a Boeing 737, if I'm not mistaken. It was a Boeing 737 out of Sochi that had to make an unscheduled landing because the flaps wouldn't retract or something like that. There was some kind of malfunction with the flaps. 190 people on board. Now, for everybody out there that's concerned about, somebody said in the comments, Petey, why would anybody get on a commercial flight in Russia? Well, there's 140 million Russians who are trying to live their lives, go and see grandma for the holidays or whatever. That's a real thing. But the average Russian is not to blame for the fact that these flights are flying. The average Russian is the victim of the bureaucrats and the quasi-state corporations that want to squeeze out of these stolen planes every dime they can get before they start to drop out of the ground, out of the air. And these planes are stolen. Make no mistake. They don't belong to Aeroflot. They belong to Boeing or to other manufacturers. And they're leased. And they have been stolen from those companies as of the full-scale invasion when Boeing and others canceled their service agreements in protest of the ongoing war. It is the Russian government and their quasi-nationalized airline industry that is putting the Russian people at risk every day, that is substituting regular, normal safety and maintenance for secondhand or knockoff Chinese parts rather than official Boeing parts. That's a problem. And it's going to result sooner or later in planes falling out of the sky. Now, this is not the time to beat ourselves up and blame ourselves for this. We're not the ones that invaded Ukraine. We're not the ones in violation of our contracts with the airline manufacturers. We're not the ones that have thumbed our noses at the world rules-based order in order to make a buck while we put our own people's lives at risk. That's all on the Kremlin gremlins. That's who's doing it. That's who should get the blame when the planes start to fall out of the sky, and they're going to. It's going to happen. At the rate that these forced landings are happening, you can be sure it can't go another 30 days, I don't think. I don't think so. It's going to happen. It's going to start to happen. Now is not the time to start telling ourselves that sanctions don't work. Sanctions work. They work. And they're working in overdrive. And that's why we're seeing now a whole new wave of Russian disinformation claiming that sanctions don't work and that the sanctions should be alleviated, or that the sanctions only hurt the little guy, and so the sanctions should be given up. This is nonsense of the first order. Now is the time to double down. Now is the time to make sanctions hurt even more. Right now, there's a lot of bullshit memes going around that the Russian ruble is outperforming the US dollar. This is a lie. Oh, sure, for the last 30 days. If you only look at a chart for the last 30 days, it does look that way. But you got to remember that to get it there, the Russians had to raise interest rates by what? Sorry, I have to do some math. 550 basis points, 5.5%, up to, no, more than that. It's more than that, right? Because it went from 8 to 15, 750 basis points in the last 4 months. That's how much they've raised interest rates, up to 15%, to get the ruble to recover barely 10% of its value that it had lost over the last year. What else did they do? They had to limit the amount of foreign currency that private companies could hold. They're squeezing 43 of the biggest exporters in Russia and telling them to turn their cash into rubles. The export and price controls that are in place to prop the ruble up make all the gains artificial. And you only see gains in the last 30 days. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. It's cherry-picked Russian disinformation bullshit of the first order. No one that understands anything about currency markets should be for a moment confused by this. These Americans who want to say that the Russians know how to do business and know how to make money are living in a dream. They're living in a dream. The USSR bankrupted itself, and now we're watching the Russians bankrupt themselves. They're doing literally everything they can wrong. It's America that has the greatest engine for the creation of wealth in the history of the human race. Make no mistake. When it comes to making money, when it comes to business, don't bet on the Russians. You're a fucking moron. Bet on America. We know how to make fucking money. Please, give me a break. All right, kids. That's what I got in the news. I'm going to go ahead and end the YouTube stream. Thanks for joining me.